Next up we have Dr. Ronan Foley from our Department of Geography. So Ronan is also a member of the Green Campus and head of the newly established Health and Wellbeing Group. And he's here to talk to us about therapeutic campus landscapes.
Thanks, Jim. And I suppose in a way I'm also really going to talk about the Health and Wellbeing Group and what it's about and who's in it and kind of what the broad aim is as well. So, yeah, just say I'm in the Geography Department. I teach GIS and I would call myself a geographer of health and wellbeing. So that's my kind of subject area, if you like. And I just want to say a little bit about the newly kind of created theme or strand within the Maynooth Green Campus on health and well-being. So I think there's a recognition that, you know, the campus spaces are health well-being assets. I think that's an important part of what we think about. I think we've all had 2 years where the idea of kind of nearby nature has been rediscovered as never before, both at home and in workplaces. It's also the case that certainly health and wellbeing is kind of built into some of the other strands of the campus committee as well, but you know, this one would be focused specifically on Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is kind of good health and wellbeing. Many of the markers used to capture health and wellbeing in the SDG 3 are very kind of quantitative, you know, and quite kind of illness focused. And a lot of people, when they talk about health, what they really mean is illness. And I think we're a little bit more interested in this group in thinking a little bit more around kind of positive health promotion, health education, that sort of more well-being side of things. So I'm the kind of working head of the group. Taisce, who's going to present a kind of a sister presentation to this later on, is involved from psychology. We have Maura and Leisha from Freble, and then Patricia Healy-Kettle from critical skills and Jennifer Lloyd-Hughes from experiential learning. So actually a mix of academic departments and non-academic departments as well on the university admin side. We feel that the department has a lot of kind of green and blue spaces and other shades and palettes, and I'll come back to that in a minute, on campus that are going on. But really, I suppose the role of our group is to promote health and wellbeing through and on the campus, and doing that through a combination of kind of research and information dissemination with other people working in this. So kind of recording and developing different initiatives, but also recognising that we're very much part of Maynooth Town, and this campus is part of, it is one of the most significant green assets, if you like, across the town, and it's a space that's shared by the university and town community. I think that's always been a brief of the campus, of the Maynooth Green Campus Committee, that we recognise our place in the town. So just kind of introducing it, say a little bit about just a little bit of that idea of a therapeutic landscape, or what the hell is that? So as I said, I'm a medical health geographer. For us, it's always about how place matters. What's the relationship between health and place, and how does place shape health? How do people use places for health? So that's a really important thing. So this idea of therapeutic landscapes is a kind of a theme or a subject that developed through geography since the 1980s, traditionally focused on kind of historic healing places, famous healing places. But more recently, I think there's been a real shift in the subject towards its understanding of kind of everyday spaces and everyday health enabling spaces and places, of thinking around how you use spaces, but also how you design spaces to promote health and well-being. So you can immediately see overlaps with sort of landscape architecture, environmental psychology, lots of subject areas. I've done a bit of research on green spaces, health and wellbeing, but I've also done quite a bit of work around kind of blue space practices. So I'm kind of interested in green and blue spaces. We have a blue spaces on campus. We have a river running behind us, which occasionally floods and affects the library stock. You know, but I think we underuse whatever is blue on campus. And I would also push in the development of a new campus plan that we create more maybe bespoke blue spaces alongside the green. An interesting thing to talk about. Just want to show you some examples visually of some of the, briefly introduce some of the work, but then show some visuals, I suppose, about how some of this work might be done. So we did a couple of years ago, and I'll show a graphic in a minute, we actually did in the library a kind of a healthy, happy campus workshop where we put a giant map of the campus in the middle of the university foyer and asked people to gather around it and mark it up and write around it. It's high time that was redone again. I think that's very overdue for another go. One one of the really interesting things that came out of that discussion and that little exercise was actually, it's often identifying what's missing as much as what's there in terms of assets. So seating on campus and somewhere to actually sit down on campus was something that came out. Lighting came up as a real issue, particularly as a kind of gendered response, certainly from female respondents. So there's a couple of things there, even in a very simple mapping exercise, I think are helpful for doing that. There's a couple of other things I'm going to talk about and just show you some graphics about. We're working at the moment, the group of us from the Health and Wellbeing Group are all involved in a project in Taisce, working with Kildare County Council on developing sensory trails and working with the local community development officers in Taisce to actually to create five different trails. So we've got students working on that, staff working on that as well. Taisce will say more about it in a minute, but we're very lucky here, probably to be the first, is it the first in Ireland? The first ever environmental psychology master's program being set up and run by Taisce starting next year. That's a space that I think really talks to this kind of idea. I think it's going to provide some real impetus in that. I've also been talking to a lovely woman called Liz Ware in the UK who's involved in a kind of global silent spaces idea. And I think that's something we could easily design on campus. I was at a lovely talk recently where, you know, somewhere like the College Garden could be marked and identified as a silent space for a fixed time with notices and things like that. So it's a good opportunity there. And then I'm also along with Jim, a member of the wider Campus Life committee, which is a cross-campus committee looking at different things. And one of the things we've been looking at is a campus app, but some of that might contain some information around where to go to take a break or where to go to get a rest and things like that. So just going to show you a little bit of graphics. I do a lot of community kind of mapping work, or have done bits and pieces over the years, and I've shamelessly borrowed from the image on the top left, which is artist Rebecca Krinka's wonderful work from Minneapolis called Mapping Joy and Pain. And what she did was, you can see there, she took out a giant map of Minneapolis into a city park, planked it there on a Saturday afternoon, and asked whoever was passing to write about that and talk about it. And she had grey dots for painful spaces and gold dots for happy places, and they were often the same place, you know, high schools. So this idea that actually one person's therapeutic space is another person's anti-therapeutic space is an interesting one to pick out. We just basically replicated that. We put a couple of maps on campus, people gathered around, they marked on the map, they drew on the map, they wrote on it. The whole idea was, you know, people are really interesting about maps. They think they're precious things. You can't mark a map. But we were, no, please draw on it, write something. And well, I can't write on a map. It's, you know, it's something quite precious. It's not. With post-it notes where people linked what they'd written, marked on the map with some comments about that space. I've also done it in Derryannan House in Kerry as part of an international outdoor learning landscape workshop with people down in South Kerry. And we did some work where we looked at sort of green spaces in forestry, blue space on the beach, and then kind of intermediate spaces in the sand dunes, and asked some questions around that and gathered. And again, this idea that the output is individual responses plus a shared response, a shared community map. And we're going to use this hopefully in Taisce as well when we're working with people down there. And then just, and I suppose the other key thing I'd say is to pick out a couple of interesting ways of doing this kind of research and some interesting tools. So I'm really interested in situ methodologies and actually gathering information from and in places. And maybe this is something that could really open up how students interact with and engage with the campus and go out and do some live work. And I think environmental psychology, we're working in this kind of area as well. So what I use a piece of software called UBPix, UBIPIX, which was developed in-house in Maynooth in the NCG, and it's basically spatial video, and it's just a video. You download the app, you walk your video, but when you upload it, it produces a track of your walk, and it links the video frame and the walk. So it's a really clever tool, where if you click on any point on there, it jumps to the frame of the video. So what you get, and also it kind of records height and speed of movement as well. So what you get from it is a video recording, an audio transcript, and a GIS track, and the ability to tag anything on that information. So I've used it in a little walk with the former artist, a resident in Treble. I was testing it. This is in Taisce in Portugal. I was testing it, and I couldn't work out why the beach and the water overlap, but of course it has a tide. So actually the track was actually more accurate than I thought. The tide was out the day I was measuring it. I've used it in the water. I spent last summer doing swim-along interviews, a very radical and pretty ineffective technique, I have to confess, but I used a GoPro, and using a GoPro means you can actually upload the images. You don't have to use a smartphone, you can use a GoPro and the images work. So I did a series of interviews with swimmers. This is an example of a swim I did with a swimmer in Gillamine in Tramore, and we recorded that, so at any point on the swim I can mark it. He was talking, we were chatting, we were swimming very slowly and talking in the water. And it's just that idea of kind of capturing something in place was really interesting. And then the other lovely thing I did last summer was the one-day symposium organised by artist Vanessa Dawes, which was a kind of a retracing of Bloom's Day in the water, talking about swimming and swimming. So we met in Sandycove and we walked, talked and swam from there across the Clontarf Baths over the course of a day. And I made my presentation from the water. That's me in the rubber dinghy actually presenting. So it was a bit of a different setting for a presentation than normal. The other thing I suppose that's a really nice way of capturing some of this stuff is this idea of a kind of a story map, again very, very widely used now by people, a kind of a geo-narrative idea again of, it's really like a kind of a glorified PowerPoint but captured with video and mapping built in there. So I was working with a project in Dublin 8 with a group with UCD particularly, and with artist Seolín O'Sullivan, and we were doing community mapping with the population of Inchicore and Dublin 8 as part of and one of the things we did was a walk along on the Camac River and walked with about 8 or 10 people along that river and tracked and recorded the conversation. And this is just it kind of summarised, and on the live version you kind of click on a point and it goes to that part of the map. There are links to videos, a drone flight, conversations that were recorded as we carried on the walk. So again, a tool like that could, I think, be really interesting to work with students developing that technology around what it's like to use the campus here as a therapeutic asset, if you like. And in fact, we have one example. Let me just check if this would work, Jim. I don't know. Let's try it out of curiosity. Hopefully it'll come up. So this is an example of a piece of work we did last summer, summer before last, with Frebel and one of my GIS students. So I run a master's program in GIS and remote sensing, and one of our students created a story map of the Taisce tree trail that had been developed by the Frebel staff. So she went in and basically got their trail and converted it to a 3D trail. So you've got the map of the route. You can click on different parts of the route there and it jumps to it. But what my student did was actually do a sort of a 3D walkthrough. You can click on that and pull it and move it around. You can play around with the visualization. You can kind of see where all the trees were on campus. You can track it around like that. And then on the left, as it goes to the ash tree, and they were using only Irish native species, I think. You scroll down on the left, and it provides some useful information. And then so you got the text linked to the map, and then there's a hyperlink. So as you scroll down the text, it moves to the next part of the map. So some of that sort of technology, I think, shows some interesting ways forward. So listen, that's just a very quick introduction to thinking about using and recording and mapping out the campus as a kind of therapeutic space, and I think it has a lot of potential in that. And just thinking about Jamie's research, it's kind of interesting. We've a couple of other projects using that UBPICS technology. One of them is with psychology, looking at working with people with dementia, with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, about maybe going and looking at particular histories of places and bringing people and try reminiscence therapy really in terms of looking at a place. And then we're also doing a bit of work in Leitrim with Louise Fitzgerald from our MA programme, doing a bit of work with local people in Leitrim about their perspectives on different types of forestry and how different types of forestry affect them as both positive and negative ways. So it's kind of interesting ideas around how you might use some of these tools. So I'll stop there.